Hi everyone, today I am very blessed to be here with Jim McMurtry, who was a French immersion teacher at Abbotsford School District here in BC, Canada, but 3 days ago was fired for the crime of questioning woke orthodoxy in Canadian schools. Could you just, I guess, start from the beginning, Jim?
Well, the beginning for me was that on the day the news came out about the graves, apparently 215 children were murdered in Kamloops.
This is the mass Indigenous graves that were allegedly found a year or two ago.
Yeah, which haven't been found, and there's no police investigation.
Have been since
and you can't
debunked.
visit and even see, and nobody's allowed to. And the report, the apocryphal, the false report, is sealed by the Simon Fraser University. This is a conspiracy that involves a lot of people right across Canada, starting with our Prime Minister. But all I did was, the day that news broke, I was a little bit skeptical because I didn't think as a teacher that one ordinarily murders one's students, because it's not good for one's reputation. So to think that there are 215 murdered children in one school seemed wrong. And I thought it was really abusive, particularly of dead Christian churches, to place that blood libel on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I obviously did a bit of reporting on this for people watching. This was the alleged mass graves found at Kamloops that all the news across the world reported. Mass graves, genocide, all this going on. And then slowly the story petered out as time went on and no evidence came up. You saw New York Times, all these different articles start to change and edit, removing mass grave from the headline quietly, but no big correction. And you had what seems to be the correct response of, well, let's wait to find out the facts and just report the facts we have right now. So you told your students what was said in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, essentially, which was that most people died in these schools from disease.
In fact, most of those kids, in Kamloops, they said 215, but there were only 51 children who ever died while enrolled at the school, and most of those children died. They'd get them out of the school, of course, if they were deeply infected with contagious disease. They died either back at their home reserve or in a local hospital. So there are very few people that ever died at the school. But 51 is the total number. So 215 is a ridiculous fabrication.
Yeah, and this is, of course, that number came from the preliminary ground radar search, which they have not confirmed in any way with excavation so far. And this is not to say no abuse occurred at the schools. It would be insane to suggest no abuse occurred at these schools. What we're, myself and you as well, it seems, are asking people is to look at the facts that have been not only reviewed by the government, but by Indigenous elders, and were put in a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for everyone to see, not the media hysteria. So can you say the...
Yeah, just on that note there, I just may say that my wife's grandmother wasn't given an education. Mm-hmm. She was an orphan. She was deemed not intelligent enough to receive an education. She had to work in a laundromat. And this is in Ireland. And then at 16, she was sent to Canada to be married. That's my wife's grandmother. So lots of sad stories if we go back in time. So, of course, there are many sad stories in residential schools, but that's not the point. I think as a teacher, I'm under an obligation to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And so I was French immersion history teacher when it happened. I had a student say in class, while I was teaching Calculus 12, but they were working the kids into an hysteria. It was the strangest thing. The kids were wearing orange. They all were given orange shirts. Some had armbands or wristbands, painting their face. It was like the 2-minute hate in Orwell's 1984. Down with Christian teachers. And I thought it was very peculiar in Abbotsford because it's known by many people as a Christian community, but there was so much that was happening around the school with orange, face painting and armbands and wristbands, and everybody had orange shirts. The teachers were wearing orange shirts. And because I was a substitute teacher, I didn't know about this, and I didn't anticipate this, and I wasn't given any directive. But within a short while of my teaching Calculus 12, I was told to stop what I was doing and talk about the news. And the news.
So a principal or someone came in and said,
no, the principal over a loudspeaker over the PA system
said you have to talk about the mass graves.
All the teachers had to talk about something that wasn't true. And the kids were all worked up, emotionally distraught. So I worried about them, so I tried to talk them down. So when a girl said that the priests murdered the children or tortured them to death by keeping them out in the snow, all I said was residential schools, generally, when there were deaths with children enrolled, it was because of disease, particularly tuberculosis.
For the most part.
For the most part, yeah. And I also mentioned accidents, fires. But I didn't say murder. And a student right away said, "Are you denying cultural genocide?" And she didn't get mad at me afterwards, because what I said, assured her, I said, "Well, I don't use the word genocide, but I see what you're saying," because it was forced cultural assimilation. People at the time believed that, it was a good thing to get an education. It was a good thing to fit into the modern world. I don't believe the intention was bad. I think the intention was, obviously to help. If they wanted to kill kids, why would they have spent money to have them educated? I think it was, the idea was it was flawed. It was done on the cheap in some cases, but it wasn't what the world is saying.
These weren't death camps.
Thank you.
Is essentially what not only someone like me would say, but what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission done by the government and elders within Indigenous tribes would say as well. It's like you said, the data, the hard data that we've spent years and years investigating, the government and Indigenous people have approved, is the majority of these deaths did happen from disease. So you said nothing false, essentially, to your class.
Yeah, but my employer was saying things false, because they were talking about, and they wrote to parents, to students, to staff. They talked about mass graves. They talked about, they presented the narrative, and it's darkness. And this is to young kids. Kids in kindergarten were told this. But it's the same with George Floyd. Kids as young as grade 1 in kindergarten were told about, did you hear about the white police officers who killed the black criminal, the black
as if
hero?
They have an idea to wrestle with these concepts at that age at all. But they're
telling the same thing. They're talking about cunnilingus and masturbation with kids in grade 1. This is Soji 1, 2, 3. This is what they're doing in our school. This is an indoctrination program. Schools are not what parent thinks, and that's why people should be alarmed. So coming back to my situation, and
yeah, if we could get right back to what happened, because 30 minutes later, after you made that comment,
I made the comments. 30 minutes later, a girl must have gone down to speak to a counselor, because the principal kept saying, "If any kids harmed," because this is what the schools are. Kids are harmed by everything. That's why they're getting rid of Dr. Seuss and all the good books that I read in high school, like To Kill a Mockingbird or Huckleberry Finn. But even recent things, like you go, what? Lord of the Flies? Everything seems to be going out to be replaced by, really lousy social justice literature. So these guys that came in my room I felt were intimidating, not intimidating to me, but intimidating just in their presence. They wouldn't answer my question. I didn't know what I was wrong. Teachers
they said, what did they say?
They didn't say anything. They get your stuff.
So they said, grab your stuff and we're
nothing
leaving.
else. I said, what did I do wrong? Why am I leaving? And then I realized it was serious, and I didn't want to make the students uncomfortable. You could hear a pin drop. Walked out in front of them, walked down, and as I was being walked out the front door, I said, "You're not answering me. I'm not leaving until I see the principal." And they realized that I was, that was the best thing for them. I said, "Make it easy for you. You should get me to have the principal talk to me." The principal was fine with me. I told him what I said. I didn't know what was it I said wrong. I went over what I said. And he said to me, "Oh, there's probably nothing that you said, but they didn't know you. You're older white man, and fairly tall, and you're wearing a mask because it was COVID." And so they didn't know me as a substitute teacher. And he said, "So they didn't know you, so that was probably your mistake." And I said, "Well, how is it my mistake when I'm a substitute teacher?" He said that there was a complaint from a student who went to guns counselor and went to me, and I phoned the district, and great, you phoned
it's gone through all the bureaucracies.
Yeah, like that. and I had to leave, so I left, and I haven't taught since, and it's almost 2 years ago.
Because you said the majority of deaths in residential schools came from disease.
If I didn't use pronouns, or if I didn't say they were just boys and girls biologically, or I didn't know the colors on the pride flag, there's all sorts of things I could go now. It's not just my situation. It's not just about the grace, which there are no grace, as you're saying, but it's more than that. It's not just about how we're talking about Indigenous. There was a teacher in Abbotsford a year before me who talked about something with kids. Could you consider something positive at residential schools in the form of a homework assignment? And they beat up. The education minister was criticizing the news, the superintendent of my district. Everybody was criticizing her, making her into a monster. And as it turns out, the lesson plan she was using was given to her by an Indigenous educator. So
So it was an Indigenous educator having the students perform a thought experiment of what is a positive thing you could say, even though we're learning about
because wokeism
mostly the
wasn't
negatives.
invented by Indigenous people. I think they're being used. I think they're being exploited. If a teacher in math and all sorts of subjects right now is supposed to talk about indigenization, they don't even know what they're talking about. So how can they do it right? The best thing to do is not to focus on race at all. The best thing to do is focus on a traditional education where you can have academic values, where you teach about, I don't know, chemistry and French and English and with this idea of focusing on one, victim group in this new Olympics in schools.
In a political ideology rather than
But
just
kids in grade
education.
1, like this, they're too young for it. It's like pushing puberty blockers with these kids.
Yeah.
Long before.
I do want to get just back to the story so we make sure we get it in
thank
whole,
you.
because I know you have so much commentary, which is amazing. But I'm sure you've been holding this all in for years,
2
in
years.
the classroom. Like, I don't want to get fired. But so they walk you out of that classroom. They say, get your things. You haven't taught since. But 3 days ago, your firing was finalized.
Yes, because it was an interesting thing. I haven't taught for years, but I got investigated a third time. So the first time they settled because they knew they were wrong and everything. The second time was over, and walked up for a second time over, as I said to you, because I said disease and not murder. And the third time I wasn't even teaching. I've been at home for 2 years, being paid to be at home, taxpayers, if you think that. Anyhow, this is a school system because, I'm dangerous because I'm a truth teller and because I'm educated and they're not. And on this area, and I'm afraid to say probably a lot of other areas as well. So that's the part that's really frightening for me is they investigated me a third time when I wasn't even there, but they're moving away a little bit from this narrative and saying that I'm guilty of talking to you, talking to the media, because after being walked out the second time, I said I was going to do something. So I started writing articles for academic journals, and I started writing to the trustees, and I started writing to the Minister of Education. And
Talking about this experience you had of being dragged out.
Outside of getting publications, which was great, but they don't amount to much. Nobody wrote back to me. Nobody responded to my phone calls. No one would meet with me. So in November, I just hit a point where I just said, I'm going to the media. And
so you were writing to the school board.
And so I finally, went to the media, and no one in the media was interested. So that didn't work out either. But they saw that I had done that because I copied them an unpublished letter to the local. The Abbotsford News is the only one I went to. They saw that I had done that, so they started a third investigation, and they're getting me in the fact that a teacher can't speak out.
Now that is scary to me.
We have no democratic rights because
if the teachers can't say what is happening in the schools, how are we supposed to know what's happening to our kids?
Because the teacher might reveal the manipulation of children. Do you know that a woman?
So they can fire you as a teacher for saying what is happening in classrooms.
They did. 3 days ago. I had a woman write to me yesterday. She said, "Thank you very much." A mother in Abbotsford. She said, "I have a daughter in the school, in her friend group. 4 of them are transitioning to male." Now that's anecdotal. That's one person. This is a huge problem in schools. They're looking for little, they're big on their side. I know ultimately to vote for Justin Trudeau or vote for, left-wing, social justice type party. But I just think this is not what you do with children. And I just can't believe parents have allowed this to happen. It's a laboratory for creating hatred against our, not only Canada today, systemically racism in the past. That every early Canadian, there are only 2 statues of Johnny MacDonald left in Canada in public, and both of them are protected. One of them under police surveillance, and the other one in Queen's Park in Toronto, it's got a big wooden box around it. They're trying to destroy all the history. This is Orwellian. This is the idea that those who control the past control the present, and those who control the present control the future.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's not just destroying it, it's rewriting it. And once you've given that narrative to the next generation, the rest will be forgotten. We've got a cultural memoicide. We won't remember how we got here or, the truth of anything. It's a really, really scary premise.
I'm Winston Smith in 1984. I'm being told I'm wrong, and I'm starting to believe that maybe I am wrong, and maybe I'm imagining how Canada was when we actually had great Canadians and really created the society that we have today. That remembering that kids were in schools and weren't divided and weren't looking at each other on the basis of race or religion or sex and orientation. Like that wasn't school.
My classroom, when I was in grade 12, we had the first Social Justice 12 course introduced when I was in grade 12 in my school, and I took it, and I'll never forget being split at the lockers between, if you're white, go to that locker; if you're not, go to the other; if you're a woman, go to that locker; if you're a man, go to the other. You're privileged, you're oppressed. And they did that for various different things, and that is completely what pushed me against woke culture. So there will be students there that will see what's going on, and hopefully they'll have parents telling them.
But where are they?
But
This is what I did when I did the Rebel interview, and that's what that's my November. I did the Rebel interview, and then they jumped over that, the Abbotsford letter there, and the Rebel interview, and it was with a woman who was black and part Indigenous. And so it's kind of ridiculous that I'm this horrible racist or whatever for questioning this sort of stuff.
She must have been terrified.
And so it gets out there, and I'm asked, what is it, what can be done? And I said, people need to get stronger. They can't, if it's just one person, then I'm going to get fired, and voila. But if it's kids, if it's parents, if it's teachers, and there's enough of this, it will end like that, because I don't think, teachers aren't walking around going, we need to have land acknowledgements every day to say how terrible our ancestors are. And what good use of educational time. Well, let's take 5 minutes saying the same thing each and every day. While kids are rolling their eyes and going, whatever. Like this is indoctrination. And so if people get strong enough, and you're part of this right now, you're part of creating around my story and other people's stories, because there's others, who are experiencing what I'm experiencing, then all of a sudden we're going to find out this will end in no time, because students don't want this. They don't want to be manipulated. They want to come to their own conclusions. They want to decide for themselves their sexuality and their politics and all that sort of stuff. And of course, parents want their kids to make it in this world. They want them to know how to write an essay and do long division. They don't want to have them going, Mom and Dad, guess what? I can tell you what races are on the pride flag now. And by the way, our race isn't one of them. So big surprise there.
Yeah, I guess for parents watching, since we are in this position where you can be fired for speaking up and saying what's going on in schools, teachers are deliberately asking students not bring home forms and not tell parents what's going on. One thing that my dad did for me when I was in school is every day, it's so important to have family meals together, have a dinner together. And he'd ask me, tell me what you learned today. Tell me what you learned today. He asked me every single day I went to school, and I'd tell him, and then we'd have a debate, and he'd question me. He never told me what to think, but he'd give me other perspectives and let me know, hey, school isn't the end-all be-all. There's a lot more out there. And I think that's the one thing that we can all do. But of course, on your side, you've had the peek behind the curtain of what's actually going on in the institutions, not just whispers from the students, and you exposing this is so important to getting that truth out there.
Can I piggyback on what you just said? The Dalai Lama once said that truth is like a crystal, that each facet or side is one part of the truth, and together it's the entirety. When they were going after me for saying the wrong thing and suggesting, of course, that this, that there are all these murdered children wasn't true, I wasn't really presenting that. I just said disease. I was just giving a different perspective. I've never said to anybody that there aren't dead children in Kamloops. There might be. Right now, we don't.
They haven't excavated, so we don't know, and it shouldn't be taught as fact.
It's unlikely, right?
Yeah.
It's unlikely that anyhow, we know it's not going to happen. But if it happens, then I'll change my perspective.
Yeah.
But all I'm wanting to do is that we can't make sense of anything until we know the whole story.
Yeah, it's a very backward system. And it's sad. And I am sorry for both the students and you that it has come to this, essentially, but unfortunately also not surprised.
But there's good that's going to come out of my situation.
Yeah?
And that good is being here with you, because more people are going to know. And I think kids, again, they want to know the truth, and they want to come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
So wokeism is contrary, not just to education, but it's contrary to the interests of children. Yeah. And what a shame that people are quiet now when this is happening.
Well, I hope many people will watch this video, some of your students as well, I'm sure. And if they do and they're interested to follow your journey and what comes next for you, where can they find you?
Well, it's going to be hard, because when you're a fired teacher, people aren't lining up to hire. So I don't know what's happening next, but I can be easily reached on Twitter So that's probably the best thing. But
I'll throw your Twitter handle up on here so people can go give you a follow.
And you can do more than you can put my email on there. I'd love that
Sure.
too. But the most important thing is you don't go into the teaching profession to do anything. I never went in to go, I'm going to use these kids to get them to learn about my sexual deviancies and my religious, passions or my political leanings. You don't do that. You leave that at the school door. You go to help kids. It doesn't help kids to use them as political pawns in a governmental lie about how Indigenous people were treated in the past.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate everything you do, and I'm so glad that everyone is getting to hear your story today. God bless, Jim.
God bless you, and thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone.